Hi, everyone. I'm Cooper Overstreet. I'm running for Douglas County District Attorney, and my campaign's doing something pretty interesting. Here over the next few weeks, we're going to start a series of virtual discussions with people who are experts in the criminal justice community, advocates, people that are on the front lines of the criminal justice community, both here in Douglas County and all across the country. So we can talk about important issues that we think are important in the criminal justice system and discuss those and inform you as listeners about those issues. We're going to start our first conversation today with an issue that's a very important, critical issue in our system today, which is the issue of sexual assault and interpersonal violence. And more specifically, how those crimes are investigated and how we better investigate those crimes to protect survivors in our criminal justice system. With that being said, it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, April is, and I think it's important to just acknowledge the statistics, how stark and revealing they are surrounding sexual assault in our country, and interpersonal violence. 1 in 4 women have reported some act of sexual violence occurring in their lifetime in our country, and on any given day, 10,000 calls are made to domestic violence hotlines in our country. These numbers are concerning, and they're revealing of an underlying issue in our criminal justice system when it comes to sexual assault and interpersonal violence. And a part of my platform is ensuring that these cases are investigated thoroughly and smartly to ensure that survivors can tell their stories and that they're protected in our system. So that being said, I want to introduce the person we'll be talking to today, who's Dr. Jennifer Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a world-renowned expert in sexual assault and domestic violence investigations. I'm going to read sort of a brief summary about her qualifications. She's currently the manager for the Advent Health Shawnee Mission Forensic Assessment Consultation and Treatment Program, the FACT program over in Kansas City. She's also an expert consultant and trainer in issues surrounding sexual assault investigations. She's testified in front of the Kansas legislature in support of stronger laws protecting survivors in our criminal justice system. And she's going to talk to us today about her role in the system and how our leaders can do a better job protecting survivors through proper investigations. So Jennifer, thank you for talking with us today, first of all.
My pleasure.
Now, why don't you give everybody out there listening sort of a background, give them an idea of what your background is in the criminal justice community.
I've been a forensic nurse examiner for the last 16 years. Beyond that, I've been a nurse for 26 years, and I've been an advanced practice nurse practitioner for 19. So my professional career revolves around the treatment of women, and most importantly, the treatment of individuals that suffer some type of criminal act against them, or individuals that are accused of such crimes.
Okay. What's a forensic nurse examiner exactly, for the people out there who don't know what that is?
So a forensic nurse examiner is, firstly, they are a registered nurse or a nurse practitioner, and they have received specialized training in how to manage the care of individuals that have had a sexual assault or some other type of criminal act against them. Their role is to work alongside other medical providers to assess injuries, document injuries, photograph injuries, collect any evidence that the individual may have or potentially have on their body, and then ultimately write a report, work with law enforcement, and then come to the courtroom and actually testify to those findings in the judicial system.
So what exactly in your mind, Jennifer, is the importance of, I guess, a sexual assault investigation, and what are the hallmarks of a thorough sexual assault or domestic violence investigation, and where do you play a role in that?
Well, as part of the multidisciplinary team, the investigation consists of everybody working effectively and using all of the tools that are in their toolbox. So this means open lines of communication and dispelling any myths that an individual inside the multidisciplinary team may have. Some issues that we have seen in investigations in general is victim blaming and becoming very siloed in approach, meaning that the only individual who the situation is investigated is on the individual that discloses that it happened, and not a subsequent investigation on that pertains to the individual that's being accused by someone else of doing that type of act. I think it's easy for care providers and the multidisciplinary team to become very siloed in approach instead of looking at all aspects and really looking at all the different variables that may exist in the beginning, or those variables that may offer themselves as the investigation gets off and running, so to speak.
Okay. So what are, in your minds, in your training, and things that you train individuals to look for when they're investigating a sexual assault case, and things that they need to be aware of when they're doing those investigations? Be aware of, anyway.
Well, I think there are some variables that are important for both law enforcement and the medical community to both be aware of. Those would be loss of consciousness, whether or not there were drugs or alcohol that were involved in the event, types of medical conditions, or even self-administered medications that an individual may be taking because they're prescribed by a provider, or maybe they're taking them for themselves in a holistic fashion. Those variables are important for the entire team to be aware of, so that very specific questions can be asked that pertain to those topics, as well as assuring that the medical treatment that's provided to them doesn't leave something untested or left on the shelf and not addressed. We find that medical providers are in an opportunity to really gain a lot of information from individuals. And that premise comes from people will be more forthcoming with information to medical providers. I think one other advantage is that most of the forensic examiners in our country are women. And not to say that women will only be comfortable with other women, but I think it may be easier to build rapport for a medical provider who is a female to build that rapport with an individual who's disclosing that they've been sexually assaulted than to an individual who is in law enforcement, who's wearing law enforcement attire, or if that individual has had experience with the multidisciplinary team that's been negative in the past, can significantly affect an appropriate investigation of sexual assault.
So you mentioned the multidisciplinary team, which can you, for the people out there who don't really know what that is, can you explain sort of the idea of the multidisciplinary team and who that encompasses?
Sure. So the multidisciplinary team are the individuals that are all involved in the event or the disclosure of a sexual assault. So this would be the responding officer, the investigator for the police department or sheriff's department, the community-based advocate or advocacy center that provides bedside advocacy, court advocacy, crisis hotline for an individual after they have either reported or not and is needing additional psychological services. It's the medical provider, it's the prosecutor, it's all the individuals that play a significant role in a sexual assault event. So it's those that are investigating it, whether law enforcement or medical. And then what do we do with all of that information and having that open lines of communication to be able to address variables that may not have been expanded upon and have a collective brain so that we're working effectively to assure that all of the information that we all need to know is being gathered and then relayed to each other.
Great. And you mentioned that law enforcement's obviously a big part of the multidisciplinary team. We've seen kind of recently how law enforcement's trained to deal with sexual assaults in various communities can either lead to survivors being listened to in a sexual assault investigation, or sort of their stories being discounted and their allegations being discounted. In your opinion and in your training, is there specific training or ideas that law enforcement officers specifically need to be aware of when they're investigating sexual assault cases and these instances of interpersonal violence that could lead to more accurate and better investigations that protect survivors?
There are actually. What you mentioned is what we call victim blaming. In Violence Against Women International actually has a campaign called Start by Believing. It is specifically focused to law enforcement as well as medical providers that when individuals disclose that they are sexually assaulted, that we believe them, that that belief makes the victim feel valued in that they came forward, that they're having a conversation with somebody, and that they're going to be believed. Most perpetrators of sexual violence will tell victims, no one is going to believe you. And that is a significant concern for individuals to come forward is someone going to believe me? If that believability isn't met, then unfortunately individuals may not proceed through the process because they feel like, why am I here? Why am I telling? Why am I doing all of this if nobody believes me? It's a huge campaign. It's something that we do in Greater Kansas City where we all meet up, take photos, and really encourage individuals that experience violence that you are believed. Please come in, please report, share your information, not just for yourself, but for other victims that may not have had that same courage to come forward to disclose that this has happened to them.
And obviously there's training specifically that law enforcement and even prosecutors can undergo where they're learning more about the sort of the complex nature of sexual assault allegations and how not to engage in this victim blaming, right?
Correct.
I'm sure there's training programs out there. Are there any of those that people should be aware of, or what that training specifically is?
Well, in Violence Against Women provides a lot of education to law enforcement. Russell Strand, he's actually over in Missouri. He actually used to be one of the educators for the military, and he provides information and training on trauma-informed interviewing, kind of doing different interviewing types to open up the lines of communication between an investigator and an individual that's disclosing sexual violence. The National Institutes of Justice is constantly doing research with NIST and putting out trainings and education. And I would say probably the National Sexual Violence Resource Center provides information to all individuals inside of that multidisciplinary team. But we have organizations here in Kansas, local organizations that are providing training and resource. We have the Kansas Coalition to Counter Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence. In Douglas County, you've got the Sexual Trauma Abuse Care Center. In Kansas City, we have the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. So it's not an issue that is remote from Kansas, and there are entities that focus specifically on sexual violence in our own state. So there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know if it's lack of funding or time, but the information is there. It's, the training is there.
One thing that we've seen just across the country is sort of a startling lack of support for survivors in the criminal justice community. Essentially what I'm talking about is we know the statistics that thousands of sexual assaults occur across our country every year, yet a small percentage of people are actually comfortable reporting those to law enforcement. What are some reasons that an individual might not be comfortable reporting a sexual assault, and what are some ways that our system can be set up to make those, to allow those individuals to feel more comfortable in reporting their victimization?
Well, I think prior negative engagement with law enforcement is a large variable. I think the other one that follows is whether or not alcohol or drugs were involved in the act. Again, that goes to that kind of believability. Sometimes it's individuals just don't know what to do. It's a traumatic experience. There are a lot of things that happen inside of the brain of an individual who has experienced trauma that actually hinders them from making good decisions. And good probably isn't the right word. They are not able to make significant decisions after they have experienced trauma. It takes time for them to be able to have full cognitive capacity again in order to really think about what's best given that certain situation. And then if that takes them time, then once they're able to make a decision, then that individual is worried that they've waited too long. I've waited too long. Now I can't have an exam. It's been too long. There isn't going to be any evidence. Or because I waited so long, this is going to impact somebody's ability to believe me. And so there are a lot of variables that really jeopardize a good investigation, because people don't experience trauma the same way, and no one can predict how an individual who has experienced trauma is going to act, or what they're going to do, or that they're going to make a decision that's going to be helpful for the end process, the prosecution process. That's not what a person is thinking about in those immediate hours or even those immediate days following a traumatic event.
One part of our platform is trying to make our district attorney's office here in Douglas County more responsive to survivors and more flexible in approaching survivors in instances where an allegation of sexual assault is made. The things you just mentioned, barriers to reporting in the criminal justice system. Obviously, there's a lot of those barriers. What is something that a DA's office can do, or sorts of trainings that they could undergo, or that we could do to make our system more flexible in helping survivors come forward and feel more comfortable in the system?
Well, I think the probably the first thing is just open lines of communication between the prosecutor's office and the victim themselves, and making sure that the victim has information as it's becoming available, and then having candid conversations about what the next steps are. The process can be long. I don't know that individuals who have experienced violence understand that the process is not, it's not swift. So when we talk about swift, it's not something that's going to be resolved in a couple of months. It's going to take some time. And I think relaying that information in a positive way to let them know this is moving in the course that we expect it to, and these are the things that we're still waiting on, and these are what those things mean to the ultimate end decision. I think that looking at the victim and the variables and events that happened around the event is one realm of the investigation, so to speak. And then you have this individual that we talked about earlier. We have this individual is being accused of doing this, and there's been some movement in doing independent investigations on both fronts, meaning both variables are being investigated separately. We know in Kansas by our own research with the SACI grant that individuals who are perpetrators of sexual violence continue to perpetrate that way. And because of those barriers to reporting, we know that there have been individuals who are serial in nature, and no one really knew who they were because they weren't investigated. And so I've been to many trainings that focuses in on this concept of you investigate the event and you investigate the individual who's being accused of this, and then you pull that information together. It works the information harder so that there's a potential to find other victims. There's a potential to find other key investigatory information for this current event that has been disclosed. And we just don't know what we're going to find out. That's why there's an investigation, is to gather all the information, to leave no stone unturned, to make sure that we're talking to all of the witnesses and all the people that could have potential information, rather than only focusing on a few rather than all.
Okay. And that sort of leads me to my sort of a wrap-up question when we're talking about investigations of this magnitude. Obviously, a sexual assault is an extremely serious crime. It's a violent crime, and it's a crime that's treated seriously in Kansas by the law. In your opinion, is there ever an excuse for any aspect of the multidisciplinary team in a case like this, of this magnitude, to not do a full and thorough investigation of these allegations or of perpetrators committing these crimes?
I don't think so. If that decision was made, then my question would be, at what point is that being made, and what information has been readily available in order to make that decision? I know that investigations take a long time, and I know that it takes a lot of information to build a good case, if we're going to use that terminology. And it's not something that can be decided upon in quick fashion. Again, if we're looking at individuals making an informed, knowledgeable decision about what they want and need to do as a victim, those guidelines are the same for us in the multidisciplinary team too. Is how can we make an informed, knowledgeable decision about what the situation is or isn't, who is implicated or not, And what are all those variables that we need to take into consideration? That just takes time.
Well, Jennifer, as we wrap up here, the one thing I want to do is I want to ask you, for those individuals out there right now, obviously this is a unique time in our country. People are living in close quarters and they're quarantining themselves and they're self-isolating. And unfortunately, some of those individuals self-isolating are forced to be in situations where they're quarantined with their abuser. And so it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I would like to know if you have any, those individuals out there who might not feel safe or, have need to report, an instance of sexual violence, what's the best way for them to go about doing that in the way that they'll be heard, in a way like a resource for them to do that right now?
There are crisis lines in Kansas that individuals can call. I do know that the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center in Douglas County does have a 24/7 crisis line. KCSDV, which is the Kansas Coalition, does as well as MOXA. Even if an advocacy organization is not in your geographic region where you are living, you can always reach out to advocacy, and they can help provide that information about next steps. There's been a lot of public service announcements of women who are calling 911 and are asking for pizza delivery. Dispatchers are becoming aware that women, and I say women because most of the individuals that we see that are victims of violence are women. We do know that it affects men, can use this topic to alert law enforcement that there is something that's going on in the home, that they are needing help, and they are needing a response. But not all individuals are ready to report to law enforcement. Any emergency room can help you. If an individual can leave a residence and get out, an emergency department can provide a safe harbor for them. It can help them with next steps. But if they're just wanting to get that information about building a plan, I would encourage call your local advocacy center there in Douglas, or call the Kansas Coalition and get that information that you need. They will provide you with where you can go.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Obviously, this has been very informative. There's obviously a ways that we need to go as a community in the criminal justice system to fully investigate and ensure that we're fully investigating allegations like this and protecting survivors and making sure they have a voice that's heard. And I appreciate you sharing this with us today. I will tell people out there that the resources that Dr. Johnson just told us about, we will be publishing those on our website and on our Facebook page. You can also go to votecoop.com. That's our campaign website. You can look at our platform and how we plan on dealing with the issue of sexual assault and making sure survivors are protected in our criminal justice community. So I want to thank you, Dr. Johnson. It was very informative. And go to our website, utilize those resources if you do feel unsafe. There are resources that advocates all over Douglas County and across the country who are protecting survivors every day. It's obviously a very important and serious topic. And thank you for being with us, Dr. Johnson.
My pleasure.
Thank you.